All right, so this, I believe, is the 21st or 22nd episode of On That Note. I've lost count somewhere on this this road trip here. And I'm sitting down with Josh Martin and Ryan Thomas Donald, from the band Little Tybee. They are, an incredibly talented duo of musicians here. They also have some bandmates who are also very talented. And I'm going to be sitting down and kind of talking to them about some music today. Okay, so this is kind of a broad question, and I can be more specific if you need me to be. And feel free to get in on this as well, Ryan. But because the way you approach the instrument, Josh, is obviously very, very unique. And the things you do on the guitar, not a whole lot of other people are doing. And obviously you have your influences. But what life events do you think led you to approach the guitar the way that you did?
I think it's a pretty basic story. I started playing, and I was left-handed. I didn't know there was a left-handed guitar that existed. I actually failed a ceramics class one time because there was not a left-handed wheel. Mm-hmm. So in other parts of my life, it did not help me. But in this part, I feel like left-handedness is one of the things that society has actually gotten over the stigma. I feel like most of the things we've stubbornly held on to, but with left-handedness, it's one of those few things where it's not that much of a disadvantage. I think we have shorter lifespans, but I ended up playing a right-handed guitar, and my left hand was able to have this rhythmic and just dominant. I think the guitar is almost set up to where you would think that the left hand should be the dominant hand, but and this was a struggle for me starting because my right hand was very confused, and I would try to do a very basic Johnny Cash kind of strumming pattern, and my grandpa would always say that you can't play lead until you can play rhythm, and I would try to play blues solos with him, and I would struggle with rhythm aspects. He would want me to hold it down, but yeah, the reason that the guitar is considered right-handed, when your right hand is playing with the pick, it's that's the rhythmic backbone, and your left hand is kind of the icing. So you just need your left hand to be the thing that you're focusing on, and your right hand needs to be the thing that's the drum set or whatever. But yeah, so because I didn't really start from that place, it was my left hand could take on a lot of responsibilities. My right hand was more free to do lead lines and more icing, and my left hand could kind of take the cake and just hammer on and do other kinds of rhythms. But yeah, that kind of, I slowly started to see that I had a really strong left hand and I could do legato stuff, and from there it became more and more I would just then it also became just identity and self-worth, and I was 12 and I didn't have a lot of friends, and I instantly made friends, so it was kind of all these things kind of had this confluence or whatever, and I was able to make friends and become semi-popular in ninth grade or whatever because I could play guitar, and then I made friends with a band and played Deftone covers at someone's birthday party.
Yeah, I remember those days. That's really cool. And one thing you touched on in that response is musical identity. And as a music teacher, I'm always really fascinated by the way in which musical identities form and how varied they are from musician to musician. So I read in an interview online that you did way back in 2014 that you had said early on you got recognition from approaching the guitar in a unique way. Mm-hmm. And you were doing it kind of unconsciously at that point, but as you got more recognition for being unique, you started to consciously kind of experiment and approach the instrument differently. So what I'm curious about is, do you think that there is another universe where you maybe got recognition for something other than that uniqueness, maybe your tone or your speed, and kind of went down that path? Or do you think you always would have ended back up at approaching the instrument in the way that you do? It's funny that you mentioned that, because in 7th grade I had this existential crisis, and this sounds so juvenile, but I was well, you were in 7th grade?
Yeah. I was I either have to be a pro skateboarder or a guitar player, and I had this complete fork in the road, and I was all right. And then basically overnight I woke up in the middle of the night and I was okay, I'm gonna be a musician. I was art, sports, there's no contest here, there's a whole emotional aspect, but yeah, so I picked the guitar, I sold all my skateboard stuff, I sold the skateboarding shirts, I sold everything. I was completely done with skateboarding, but yeah, I always picture, because I had all this willpower, and I always picture what if I had just only skated after that, there's some alternate version of me that picked it. But no, when it comes to music, I think yeah, I think I started off and I was very into technique, and I feel like I was kind of rewarded for that aspect, and also there's just like a wow factor right away from that, and then the internet rewards that also. But yeah, I think now as I'm getting older, I'm kind of maturing into more of I'm starting to really appreciate the timbral characteristics. I'm starting to appreciate like different pedals and different ways of arranging pedals, and just a lot more subtle things that like make the guitar fit into a mix, things like that.
Interesting.
But yeah, I don't think there was like a definitive. I don't know. Yeah, I can't imagine some definitive thing that would have totally changed my trajectory. But yeah, I'm not sure.
Got it. And then Ryan, to open that question up to you, I'm curious, what were some things that you sort of early on in your music career, were you always a bass player?
I started playing trumpet when I was 10,
okay,
and then but added the electric bass when I was 13.
Okay.
So, I always wanted to be a drummer. So like I think what
you failed.
Well, I think what happened was it was like 5th grade, so like my parents took me into the music store. It's like you'll be in concert band, and I from that age I knew I wanted to be a drummer.
Okay.
And I went into the music store, and the guy he's like, oh, what instrument do you want to play? I was like, I want to play drums. He's like, all right, clap this rhythm, and it was like. And to this day, like, I swear I did it perfectly. And then he was just like, no, I don't think drums are for you. And I was like, and then I think it was just my parents standing behind me like, no, not drums, not drums. It's like, we don't want to have to listen to that record, So he was like, pick another instrument. And I was like, literally it was just a wall of band instruments all in a row. And I was like, trumpet? Is that a trumpet? And he's like, all right, you're a trumpet player. I was like, that was weird. That didn't go how I wanted, So I toughed it out, and it taught me something interesting. I was like, wow, I like really understand music theory. And if I had just become a drummer, it would have just been rhythm. So a couple friends of mine, a drummer and a guitarist, were like, hey, do you have any interest in playing bass? And I was like, yeah, sounds fun. I could have said no. But when I started playing bass, I realized like that's the instrument between, like that literally joins the rhythm with the harmony. And I already knew enough about music theory that I just took off with it. But that was because I wanted to be a drummer. I think, like, relating this question, I was like slap superstar with my right hand. It was just like all rhythm, but like very little note choice. So that was kind of like the whole existential crisis thing. I stopped playing bass for a year in like 2008 or 2009 and played guitar in a band because I was like, this will be fun. And when I picked the instrument back up, I'd lost a lot of that speed with my right hand. And then it was like, oh, my note choices now have to be more important because I have a little bit less dexterity.
Interesting.
And it definitely worked because I still have a little bit of that slap technique, and I've actually been working on it a lot more recently, but I've kind of strayed away from that and gone more towards like melodic.
Yeah, and I can definitely see that in the band, in the context, absolutely.
To add something to what you said about musical identity, it is, I think, important how you kind of view yourself as a musician, and like something subtle like I'm a composer versus I'm a guitarist can change the way that you approach lots of situations. But I saw a guy tell me that he started looking himself in the mirror, and he like did a lot of like working out or whatever, but he never considered himself an athlete. And once he did consider himself an athlete, it changed his priorities, it changed the way that he was motivated. And then I had another person that told me, one of my friends, they said that they couldn't view themselves as an artist anymore. They had to view themselves as an educator because it would drive themselves crazy. And it makes a lot of sense to me because I think artist, the title comes with a lot of baggage. It also comes with a lot of expectations on kind of this self-destruction that I think artists are very capable of and rewarded for a lot of the times. Yes. So I'm lately really concerned with like how I'm viewing myself, and I'm trying to make it the most broad thing. I used to be hyper into being a guitarist only, and I thought it was a modest position. I thought like I'm never going to say I'm a drummer or a bassist because I'm not, and I would feel really bad to try to pretend.
Correct.
But what I started to realize is that I could be more of a broad musician, more of a broad kind of composer, and I could do a lot of stuff. Like I was playing in keys recently, but also I composed a part without my guitar recently, and all these things are available. Like you can sit on Ableton and write music, and it's not, the stuff that comes out still sounds like me, and that's what I started to realize. Like it's not that I'm like technically bound to a guitar. And you see stories like people like Jason Becker, they're still writing albums, and they like lost like physical ability, but that's like really inspiring. And also kind of it liberates you from this kind of physical realm where you can make music with your eyes if you want. You know, like you can be this kind of diverse array of stuff, and you don't have to be one specific thing, and it changes the way that you kind of value stuff, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was one thing. When I was younger, I used to think of myself only as an artist, and that was self-destructive and very egocentric. And recently I've found that the most healthy way for me to approach music is to think of myself as a student whose art is the application of his knowledge and experience.
Interesting.
And that way you're focusing, it's helped me focus on the learning aspect, and then through that constant learning there's usually constant inspiration as well.
Yeah. Awesome.
But yeah, so continuing on that identity, I had a second question kind of along those lines. And that was, in that same interview, you had said at one point that when you enjoyed listening to certain cliches, but when you actually played kind of predictable guitar lines, it made you physically uncomfortable, were the words you used. And do you ever worry that desire to innovate is something that prevents like a larger audience from digesting some of your more complex work?
Yeah, for sure. I think, your story, I guess, until you die, I mean, even then, your story is still, it's in the mind of other people. So, like, you the meaning of you is always kind of changing in different people's mind and being reformed every time they think about you. But, I've lately been focused more on, like I said this earlier, like timbral characteristics and setting up expression pedals where I can control subtle things about the EQ or like pitch shift and tremolo speed, all these kinds of things where I can really have these textural kind of like inputs versus only relying on technique. But yeah, I think there's a maturity there that I'm slowly getting, and I think that there will be a more accessibility, I guess. But when I was younger, it was very much like all fire. It was like I want to like burn everything down. And then now I feel like I want it to be a lot more subtle. I want there to still be complexity, but I want it to be kind of beneath the radar. I literally want people to be able to bob their heads through pretty much anything that we put out, and that wasn't a big goal when I first started. I wanted to make more angular sounds that were abrasive and that were loud and kind of showed that I was there. But yeah, now I'm kind of seeing the value in having that digestible, but also something maybe more like extended release where there's a lot going on, but it's subtle and it's like hard to catch the first time. And then if you really kind of go back and listen, there's a lot more there for anyone that wanted to do that. But also you could just, like if you were just, I don't know, drinking at a party, you could vibe out or dance or feel good. And you wouldn't have to have like glasses on and like that glasses emoji. Like you wouldn't have to be like doing math to like listen to it or enjoy it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's rad. And switching gears a little bit, this is one thing that I've, as a teacher, been more kind of aware of, so I'm curious to hear your opinion. Obviously, you draw influence from a lot of world music, which is obviously a very problematic kind of title.
Yeah.
But I've seen the tapping demonstration you did to that Indian rhythmic solfege video, and then obviously there's just a lot of complex harmony and rhythm that you can tell you're drawing from a lot of different places culturally. And unfortunately, all of that does get lumped under that kind of world music category. And what do you think it would take to get Western audiences to start differentiating between cultures and actually have that become kind of a bigger part of the music education process in this country?
Yeah. So yeah, that's huge. I've been reading a lot of books. There's one. I can't remember the title of it, but yeah, it's harsh. It's hard for, I feel like, us to fully, I don't know. It's hard to just kind of jump in a whole other like world and try to make a claim about it or anything like that.
Of course.
But I do think that there is a kind of a mutual respect, and if you show that you care, I feel like that there is a back and forth, a conversation. But I did a call video, semi-recent, where I basically transcribed this really complicated rhythm and I put harmony to it, and the whole time I was just painfully careful about, I don't know, being disrespectful. People will go play tablas, they'll go learn conical and like their whole life, it's not something,
It's not something you dabble in for an Instagram video.
Yeah. We had a percussionist that played with us, Colin Agnew, and he told me something that really kind of changed me. We were at one point, this is probably like 8 years ago, we were saying like, I was just saying that I wanted to get a pair of like some tablas to play around with, like they were in Musician's Friend for like $100 or something like that. And I remember thinking that this was a good idea, and my friend said, Colin was just like, don't do that. And I was like, why? And he's like, there's no shallow end of the pool here. And I was like, what do you mean? And he's like, people spend their whole life to this. This is a really like integrated kind of tradition, and people have really strong opinions about it. If you just go and just like, I don't know, dilly-dally on it, like it feels disrespectful. And I started to think of things more in that regard, I guess, and it kind of changed the way. But with this, I asked everyone that was involved and said I wanted to cover it. I told them, they were all stoked, and then everyone it was a really great kind of cultural exchange that occurred. I think to get it more in the education process, I feel like we have not done a great job of giving people credit and trying to respect different traditions. I feel like the history of America is kind of like people making music, America snoozing on it, and then us getting it sold back to us. It's kind of like the history of the blues. Like a lot of the blues we didn't appreciate, or I guess white America didn't appreciate until
artists.
Until it was sold back to them from like, I guess, a British interpretation, which is and that still happens. It was like I don't know, like a Hiatus Coyote, who are great, and like Erykah Badu endorsed them and they toured together. But I just remember like a lot of people that I know weren't listening to Erykah Badu or any of the actual like soul and neo soul stuff until like white people came out and did the same thing. Not to say that what they did was bad, because there is a level of respect that like they have. But I think that the more we are capable of showing respect and not saying that I'm going to take this, use this for my like, I don't know, I always picture Alexander the Great. He was like, controlling like all of Europe and Asia, and he was like 16, and he would like wear Persian garb, and he would have like 4 wives from different cultures. And I always picture this person being like people seeing him as like this worldly figure, but then I picture all those people from those different cultures hating him, being like, what are you just like ripped something out and you're choosing it for your own, like. So I try to just like show that I give a shit, essentially. And I think that the more we do that, the more that we kind of have this honest conversation where like, is this okay? Like, you ask people, can I use this? You give people credit. You don't just try to appropriate it for your own like desire or your own kind of brand and just leave everyone else out of the conversation. I think that that's like the main thing. I think that education could be better, and we could kind of like, I feel like there's plenty of people that would love to come to America and teach like Kanakal in like an elementary school or something like that, or like Indian classical music and stuff like that. I think there are people that are qualified to do that, and people probably in the States that are qualified. But I just think it's about seeking out people that are actually like representative of that tradition, and people who know, and not trying to find someone who wants to like fashionably wear it and just kind of give you a superficial representation of it. I think that something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you have any thoughts on that, Ryan?
I guess the standpoint of like early music education, like when I think back, like even in elementary school, there was music class, and I don't remember anything from it. Like, I remember
hating it.
Yeah, it was like, well, because that's how I knew I wanted to be a drummer, because they were like, make a musical instrument, and like, some kid had like a broomstick on a box and tried to make a guitar, and I just took like pots and pans and Pringles cans and put them around my neck and made effectively like quads, like a marching band kind of thing. But then, growing up and realizing that was a path for me, like in high school and then all this kind of stuff, it's like you pick jazz or classical. It's like, obviously it was like, oh, jazz, it's based on math. It makes a lot more sense to me. It's more modern. But then I'm like, what am I missing out on? And then it was like then that was around the point when like YouTube was coming out and you could really use the internet to explore the whole world. And you're like, why were we not taught, like Kanakal and all that kind of stuff? Yeah. Like there's different, like it's not just 12 tones or 7 tones if you're thinking about it diatonically. Like there's so many different types of scales, semitones, quarter steps, all that kind of stuff, and rhythms that just melt your mind. Like if you're just listening to AC/DC your whole life, And it's like I guess my main point is if we were exposed to that at a younger age, if music class was more like, here's just listen to a bunch of stuff, here's some stuff to bang on. Yeah. Like I remember there were literal theory lessons when I was like, 6-7 years old. It's like, I'm not going to retain any of this. This is too abstract. It's like, find which kids have rhythm and which don't, and then, put the ones that have rhythm on drums, put the ones that don't have rhythm on piano, and everybody will be fine. You know?
I just think, exposure to those traditions early on, and then to people who know about the traditions. I mean, you could have guests, you could have all kinds of stuff that happen, but I feel like that is especially beneficial for younger people. Like the idea of like learn the basics and then experience these things that you can't comprehend.
Yeah.
I feel like the fertile kind of ground of developing, like, I don't know, 8-year-old or something, they're totally ready to absorb all kinds of novelty and different things that other adults would like find not good or whatever.
Very true. Do you have any music education experience, Ryan?
I mean, like, we both went to AIM at the same time, and I've done, private lessons here. It's just so tough to find bass students that it's like...
Oh, really?
Yeah, well, I mean, just so few people want to learn how to play the instrument.
Interesting. I've found in my classes, because we teach contemporary instruments, like bass, guitar, drums at my school, and there's a shocking amount of like middle school girls who are really into bass because of Adventure Time and the character Marceline.
Yeah.
And so I have like 7 or 8 girls who like came to me and were like, I want to play the bass. I don't want to.
That's amazing.
Maybe there'll be a resurgence one of these days. We'll just have every character in every cartoon ever play the bass. And then we'll be fine.
That's how I solve it.
Marceline is pretty convincing, and she's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I realized how teaching kids is actually great for like having your thumb on the pulse of America or whatever, because you can really see like how pop culture influences their desires and things like that. But like, I remember Guitar Hero came out and that like took over everything. And I was teaching then, and I remember some kid said he practiced because he played Guitar Hero. He didn't actually practice, and I was like rolling my eyes at this whole thing. But then after I was done like resisting it or whatever, I started seeing all of these kids start to want to learn all these guitar heavy songs, and I didn't expect that. I was seeing it as a way for kids to get out of playing guitar, but it literally inspired so many kids to play guitar. It also inspired them to listen to guitar music, but I think that now there's a lot more hip hop and a lot more contemporary or any pop music. I hear guitar on it. I was listening to like Young Thug's newest album, and there's guitar all over it. But a lot of those influences, just subtle reverberations when you kind of promote the guitar in whatever way. It could be through Adventure Time, or it could be through, like a video game. But it has an effect, and it really does like change the trajectory of these kids' paths or whatever.
Yeah, and so kind of putting that into the next question form a little bit, like, how has teaching affected your approach to music? Because I know you're someone who's very passionate not only about making music, but about music education, teaching on your Patreon, teaching on Instagram, teaching at, I think you teach at AIM still?
Yeah.
And then obviously the private Skype lessons that you do. How has that affected your approach to being a composer and a musician?
Teaching people, it really, I mean, it makes you better. It helps you learn the concepts better yourself. Having to explain it a lot of times. I mean, I think this is common knowledge for teachers. But yeah, if you need to learn something, prepare a presentation as if you're teaching a class about it, because to have the authority of knowing about it is to kind of rearrange it and try to articulate it in some way that's less idiosyncratic about you and more broad. But yeah, I've taught lessons before, and I always kind of try to chase the engagement of the student. This is kind of a privilege because I don't teach a lot of beginners. So there's a way where I can be like, oh, you think this is cool? And I'll read their facial expressions, and I'll kind of just follow it. And then I guess I would do it with children too. But yeah, you just try to find what makes them excited and keep going. And it might not be the best for like having a plan and making sure you're giving them this like completely like holistic kind of education. But for me, a lot of times I'll teach people for like 3 or 4 lessons, and then they'll digest it for a few months, and then they'll come back to me like a year later or something like that. So it's like rarely a consistent student. But even at AIM, they give me a class where I can just do whatever I want. So I'll be like, today we were reharmonizing stuff last week. Today I found this vocal only track of a Alicia Keys song. We're gonna put that in this mode of harmonic minor called Lydian sharp 9, and we'll try to just reharmonize a pop song in some like weird, obscure kind of stuff, but it's always super fun, and I could tell if they're into it or not, and it's like I'm not trying to teach people if they're bored. I'll try to just follow what is exciting, and I think a lot of times that has to do with the teacher being excited about it. So typically I'll only teach stuff that I'm really excited about, which is another thing. Like, yeah, it's not as easy when you're like, if you're at a music store teaching like kids all day. But yeah, I will get really excited about stuff. I'll teach them, and then we'll have this back and forth. And like a lot of the times after a class or after a lesson, I'll end up writing something based off of what I was just teaching, or I'll come up with lesson ideas or like video ideas. But yeah, it's interesting. Like one time I was teaching this kid, and he was like, I was showing him this Rosciato technique, and the kid was just like, I think this kid was probably 12 or 13. He was like, why don't you do that while you tap? I bet you could tap a note and then flick the strings underneath it. He literally just like blew my mind, and I just proceeded to ignore him for the rest of the lesson. But we both worked on it together, and it was weird. I ended up making a whole video after that about this thing called Strumming, and I used it probably on like 20 songs. I still use it all the time. There's a song Tuck My Tail. The whole song is like this technique, but basically you like tap a note, and then you can kind of flick out. You can tap one note or more, but yeah, you can just flick out and still use your fingers, and you can basically have your right hand like strum things while your left hand is moving around and doing rhythmic stuff. But yeah, there's always like dots that are like waiting to be connected, and like a lot of times just having more eyes on a problem will help you kind of understand it in different ways.
And then Ryan, same question to you. How has teaching affected your approach to music?
Well, I think especially as a bassist, like teaching through the years, like I was even teaching like private lessons to people I knew back in Savannah when I was still in high school. And it was a very small pool of people. I mean, it's way smaller than Atlanta, but there were a couple kids that wanted to learn just what I knew in high school, just growing up playing in like a public school jazz band and all that kind of stuff. And the more I did it like through the years, the more I realized like I could explain things a lot more succinctly as I continued to gain experience, and then that was made it a lot more easier for me to internalize the concept, because it's not like you're saying a paragraph just to tell people how to go from the 5th fret to the 7th fret. Of course. It's more just like the more you teach it, the more ingrained it becomes in you, and the easier it becomes just to access in your own mind, and then you don't even have to think about it anymore. Then you can move on to like bigger concepts and all that kind of stuff. But I haven't taught a lot of private lessons recently. I would like to start getting back into it, but yeah, I guess mainly the point of just being like succinctness is key as a bassist, because we don't have time to sit there and talk about flowery stuff. It's like, no, you got to play the root of that chord. You got to know what it is. You got to know why inversions work and which ones to play.
Absolutely. And then one thing I'm curious about too is obviously the music that you play and the way that you approach the instrument, Josh, requires a certain level of obsession. And so I'm curious, does that obsession ever become unhealthy?
Yes. No, so I think I didn't have a lot of positive, and this goes back to the identity aspect of being an artist and things like that. Pretty much every time I would announce that I was engaging in something unhealthy, like working on a part for 30 hours straight, like just obsessing, like manically obsessing over it, people would praise me for that. And I think that it's done some kind of damage. I think I'm completely happy where I'm at, and I'm stoked that I guess had the motivation to do those kinds of things. But I think there was a level of like mental illness involved, and I think that people were glorifying it, and so I've had a hard time, and this has been maybe the past couple years, I've tried to kind of separate myself from that, and try to think more holistically, more long-term. I've also noticed things like the more you obsess over something, generally the less likely it is to occur. It's kind of like the more you desperately want to be beautiful, the more ugly you see yourself, the more, and this is like an Alan Watts quote, but he basically says like, the more like greedy you become, like the less satisfied you are with what you have. Like the more like obsessive you are about any particular thing happening, it's like the less. It's almost like to be happy you can't like be obsessed with like becoming happy or something like that. It's almost like counterproductive. But I would notice things like I would put everything on trying to play a good show. And occasionally it would happen, and then the next night, you're trying to play that. You're like, what did I do last night to make it so good? And you're preoccupied with the last night, the desire of trying to have these expectations or trying to have this specific result. And it almost never will be this exact thing that you want. So I'm learning in these past couple years that I should kind of like accept the way things occur, and not come in with so much. I just feel like having all of this like cloudedness from expectations from inadequacy from insecurity, all of these things, which you can't necessarily control, but I can kind of sit back and observe the thoughts rather than totally like shake their hand and welcome them in. So I'm learning that we just did a video recently.
Literally Thursday.
Yeah, 2 days ago.
2 days ago.
But what's the
Standard Electric.
Standard Electric. It's cool, but it's like one shot of a VHS, and he's just filming. And
is that Cherry Log that just came out?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
And, we literally just put it out like what 2 or 3 hours ago.
Yeah, but
you sent it to me.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and this was a different approach for me. In the past, I've just obsessed over parts, and like there's a part in More Like Jason, which is actually really cool, but it's this whole slidey part, and I wrote it, and basically I spent probably 30 hours straight on it, and then I deleted all the files when I was like mad at it, and I re-recorded it, and then we put out the album, and I still like the other ones better.
The ones that you deleted?
Yeah, and I think that I was literally just having this like manic episode around this part, and everyone like, I don't know, I would post about how obsessed I was with this album and how I was trying my hardest, and I felt like I was trying to like reach into the sky and like make God like make this occur exactly how I wanted it, and it just would never get there, and there was like physical limitations, but I felt like I really had an unhealthy relationship to that, and I felt like everybody was like I don't know, so and so likes this, you know, like in my mind it was like I had all the validation for doing this completely, like it just wasn't considering myself. I wasn't listening to my body. And I think there's a lot of things now that I'm realizing actually matter a lot, like your posture, but also your sense of balance. Like if you're standing up and your weight isn't distributed evenly on both of your feet, it's like your timing is offset by that. Your head, and like if it's like bobbing with the music, if you're kind of just like mindlessly swaying, it's like the sound and how it's hitting your ears. There's all kinds of things that have to do with the way that you're respecting your own body, and how that like influences your playing. But it would be the point where I'm worried about this part. It's like my wrists would be hurting, my back would be hurting, whatever. All of that was out of the window. It was only tunnel vision, and I feel like that it's great that I'm realizing that that's not sustainable, and that like I guess it kind of propelled me in the beginning, and I'm kind of stoked to have that kind of motivation. But at the same time, I'm realizing now how unhealthy it was, and how I'm gonna like wear out completely, or burn out, or whatever if I keep going in this direction. So I have to stop, and I have to like play for 20 minutes, get up, like go outside, like breathe in the air, like talk to a friend, tell someone I love them, you know, like go back inside, play, listen to my body. If something hurts, like chill out on it. Like the razor sharp like focus tunnel vision thing. I mean, I think maybe as a teenager or something you can pull it off, but there's a point where you have to establish healthy habits. You have to respect yourself, consider yourself like an artist or a musician or a composer or whatever, but consider that as like you are qualified to do that, and like empower yourself, like love yourself essentially. But I'm just learning that slowly. But
one thing, because obviously, I mean, I have a question specifically about that song, More Like Jason, because that part is pretty legendary. At least in music like circles, or musician circles, I should say. So, and hearing you describe it and your kind of tunnel vision on it, I'm curious, were you thinking about kind of the lyrical theme as you were playing that, or were you just so focused on the part?
Yeah, I have. So yeah, the part, basically the whole song. Some of the songs like will come to us pretty formed, and Brock will kind of come up with a lot of different parts, and I'll have this kind of cohesive thing. With that one, it was like mostly coming from me, so I had like the chord progression for the verse, I had all these different things, I had this bridge section, but basically I knew I wanted all of that to fall apart, and to basically have this almost like post-apocalyptic vision to where everything is fell apart, there's like ashes in the air, but the idea was I had been listening to these different calls of prayer in like the UAE and stuff like that, and I was fascinated because they didn't consider them music, but they sounded like beautiful music to me, but they're like specifically not music in that culture, and that was like really curious and interesting to me. But I remember thinking, like, if you had society fall apart and you had like AI or robots that were all that was left, I had this like vision of, you'd have this ashes of civilization, you'd have these robots that were still going, and you'd have a lot of these human rituals, and the robots wouldn't necessarily know what was necessary to sustain intelligent life. So these robots are just performing different rituals that humans did because they're just playing it safe. They're conservative, trying to figure out like what will sustain life. But this to me was like this robot call to prayer where there's like a ring modulator on the part and there's all these slides. But it was just this weird vibe where I wanted to make this like these robots engaging in this kind of human thing, but then make it sound like it was a robot, but then make it sound like it was like fundamentally human and try to play with that difference. But yeah, that's like, yeah.
That's sort of the musical concept behind it?
Yeah, yeah. And so I don't even think the lyrics were written yet, so I didn't really know where the song was going to go. But at that point, I was just trying to make this kind of dystopian future. But yeah.
Okay, so that's a really interesting thing because that's, again, is there any... And not that it's a bad thing or a good thing necessarily, because it's just how music is made, but I'm curious how you feel about, because you have this whole vision for the music behind that song, and it's very specific, and it's very like thought out, and then we get the lyrics on top of it, and that kind of changes the way the song is kind of interpreted, because there's so much focus on it, obviously singers and words and lyrics.
Yeah.
Is there any sort of friction there? I mean, I'm curious what your impression is of that.
It's weird. I feel like I'm kind of in one lane and then the lyrics are in another. Like, I don't know. I kind of let Brock personally kind of sculpt that, our singer Brock. But then, yeah, and then he does the same with the guitar parts. So it was kind of like me going off, and then the lyrics came afterwards, and how we felt about, like, I guess the parts or how they inspired him. But yeah, I don't know. I guess the holistic kind of total of the song is what a listener experiences, but maybe there's more to it if they like kind of peel back the layers and listen to it a lot of times. But for me, yeah, I kind of just focus on what I'm doing, and I kind of let the song like emerge as it does, however it does. Yeah, I'm not trying to tightly grasp it and like hold on to some specific thing and curate it every step of the way.
Of course.
I think I'm working on some solo material. I'm going to do a solo album for Koala Nights, and that will be more of that kind of tight grip. But with our band, we have 6 members, and it's pointless to try to hold it so tightly, and also it's not healthy for all of us to just have that kind of rigidity. Like, we have to kind of be open, and I get this a lot in music, but yeah, the more freedom you give people, the more invested they are, and the more they can invest themselves. If you want them to play exactly what you want, then you better pay. But if you want them to be invested in your project and to care, then it's a different thing.
Yeah.
Unless you pay a lot, you can pay a lot. They can care too.
Yeah, absolutely. And then one question I like to end with is, and this is for both of you guys, if you could go back in time and give your younger self one piece of advice about making music, what would it be?
For me, it would probably be like to listen to your body, to not attach your self-worth to how good you played that day. That's like ultimately futile. And like we had a show where we sold out in Brooklyn and we were headlining it, and I remember I remember thinking this like projected future of me being like on top of the world, like, wow, we sold out, this is gonna be a great night. But I missed like 2 notes or something, and I was so obsessed and in my head and so annoyingly self-conscious about it that I was like having like suicidal ideations and stuff about these just ephemeral things that didn't matter, that no one noticed. And I was just like sitting there, and I just could not take any kind of success because I was so obsessed with some like ideal. But I think, I would just tell myself to listen to my body and to not attach to love myself regardless of what I'm doing. Even if I decided to never play music again, to love myself and appreciate myself, without tying it to my performance in that moment, like specifically, like, I think it's just kind of toxic for people to kind of build themselves around how you're playing in the moment.
Yes.
It also makes you play worse, I think, too. Like, you literally play worse because you're so fixated on it. But I think you casually come in. We had a guy, Quinn, play sax on our song that we recorded on Thursday.
Great solo, by the way.
And we did like 3 takes of it, and they're completely all completely different. But he improvises with people all the time, and it's just the chillest mindset. But that kind of thing, the seasoned like person that's like at all of the jams, the person that's always willing to play and that's not beating themselves up, at the end of it, like that that to me is such a place to kind of aspire to get to. Like I want to come into a session, play, feel self-assured, not expect any particular thing, and then be happy with what comes out. Like I think that's kind of the goal. I think if I could talk to myself in the past, it would be like to let go of this like tight grip on like how you're trying to curate how people see you or whatever because of this technical prowess or something like that. It would be to kind of just embrace the moment and experience it as it is. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Ryan?
Yeah, I guess other than the joke of being like, just stop playing music now and focus on something else that pays, that's the joke. But the one piece of advice I wish I could have given myself, even especially in high school, is like learn to broaden your listening horizons. Like I didn't get into like Radiohead and just like weird music, and then even like Motown and stuff like that as a bassist. Like I didn't get into that stuff until like 2008 or 2009. I graduated high school in 2005, so it was just like Radiohead was like in their heyday, and then I would, I was like playing jazz. I was like, I only listen to music that has crazy bass on it, and that whole thing just missed me. And then I went back and listened to OK Computer like 10 years after it came out, and was just like, this is brilliant. Like, why did I think this sucked 10 years ago? When I was like coming of age, and then that. Speaking of like I was talking about earlier, where I put down the bass for a year, like when I picked it back up, I was pretty much only listening to like Motown, Radiohead, and like Headhunters era Herbie Hancock. So like those three bassists, Colin Greenwood, Paul Jackson, and Jamerson. Yeah. Mostly Jamerson, obviously. It like I stopped slapping. Like it completely changed the way I focused on the instrument. And if I'd had the maturity and the mental wherewithal to understand that like not everything is jazz and not everything is technique, and it doesn't matter how fast you can play and how fast you can slap and everything, I guess I would have broadened, what I could have done earlier on in my life if I just opened my ears a little bit more. But I guess that comes with getting older too. Yeah. But
yeah, absolutely. Well, that's really cool. As you notice, this was a little bit less of a music theory heavy discussion, and that's because Josh does so much of his own transcription and teaching over on his Instagram and his Patreon. You should definitely check out his Patreon because it has some of the coolest stuff and just super in-depth breakdowns of all of his insane techniques, and it helps him make money, which is very important. And so what else do you guys have to plug?
We have an East Coast tour coming up through the end of June and beginning of July. We're recording right now. We're kind of in the studio. I'm doing a Koala Nights record, which is going to be cool. And then I'm also doing a book. It's with Sheet Happens Publishing called Tactile Probabilities, which should be pretty cool. But yeah, it's going to be just a comprehensive look at like seeing the fretboard with two hands. And I'm trying to just really develop this like kind of total like ability, just a way of seeing it, and just kind of having this intuition where you can kind of know where to go with both hands in like most situations, so you can just like jam or whatever.
Is there a tentative date for when that's going to be published?
There is not. I've been working on it. I'm probably like halfway done. But yeah, we're about to go on the road and then get back, and I'm going to kind of hit that full force, and then do also the Koala Nights record. I think I'm going to have John Douglas record it. He lives in Atlanta. He did like The Contortionist. He just did Nick Johnston's album. But yeah, that should be cool. That's been in the works my like whole life probably. But
you get your whole life to write the first ones.
I'm calling it, I haven't really told anyone this, but yeah, I'm calling it retro causality, which is because a lot of the stuff I wrote when I was like 17, other parts I wrote like yesterday. So it's like I'm trying to engage with the past, and sometimes I'll end up almost like making it more nostalgic than it actually is, because I'll see the past in this like weird lens where I'm kind of amplifying the childish aspects of it. It's interesting though to engage with your past self and try to make it work. But yeah, it's fun.
The crazy thing about that whole retro causality, that exact number of letters is the exact number of steps in the Penrose stairs.
It's like,
and you can go forward and backwards.
It's an infinity stairway where it's like goes down, but it's actually going up.
Well, because he told me that one night, we were just like Facebook chatting, and then I was like, he sent me the Penrose stairs, like, this should be the album cover, and I counted the number of steps and then counted the number of letters. I was like, dude, that can't be a coincidence.
Yeah.
But no, I've also got, I'm doing a transcription book of the 2016 self-titled record through Sheet Happens, and coincidentally, I literally finished it today.
Oh,
so
wonderful.
I literally like an hour ago was like, last note, done, save, all right, back this up, don't lose it, you know. So hopefully that will be, it'll definitely be a pre-sale on the road, but if not, like it takes some time to get, I was hoping to be done with this a couple weeks ago, I've just been so busy, but yeah, so hopefully there'll be physical copies on the road, if not, it'll be a pre-order. But
very, very cool. Thank you guys for sitting down with me and taking the time to share your knowledge. It is much appreciated.
Oh, this is awesome.
Cool.
Thanks for having us.
This was great.